Hello and welcome everybody to LR lesson number 11. Today's subject of discussion is inference questions, and arguably this applies to other question types as well. But the one we'll be doing is an inference question. But more specifically, I want to go over an example of how I get myself ready to actually abandon a prephrase that I do in a given scenario based on my recognition of mental gymnastics at play. So I just want to start off by saying prephrasing is fairly important. I wouldn't call it essential every single time, but I believe it's always at least helpful to attempt them. And you see me do this on my channel, even though I don't always end up with a full-on prephrase per se. I do always attempt to get towards that in my analysis. That being said, there is a very specific problem with prephrasing for students in the 160 score range, where presumably a lot of you guys are. Mental gymnastics to justify your prephrase or mental gymnastics to eliminate what ultimately turns out the correct answer, that is something that I've seen happen quite a bit when it comes to this sort of task. So you've come up with a solid prephrase. Solid, by solid, I mean it's logically consistent with the information you have in the stimulus, and it sounds a lot like the prephrases that have worked well on easier questions. However, you're going through the answer choices and there's one of them that fairly closely matches your prephrase. It's not exact, sometimes it is, but many times there's a slight difference. But the real problem is there's another answer choice that's much narrower in scope. It sounds nothing like your prephrase, yet it seems plausible. It doesn't seem wrong. It just wasn't what you were looking for. In many of these instances, students either work too hard with mental gymnastics to justify the prephrase like answer, or you work too hard to eliminate the narrower scope answer. Again, this isn't the case 100% of the time, especially for non-inference questions, but learning how to compare that almost my prephrase answer versus the narrower scope answer might be broadly helpful across several different question types, because again, it may help you recognize the signs of unacceptable levels of mental gymnastics on the horizon. So the question we'll be doing today is from PT 83. Specifically, it's in section 1, the first LR section, question number 13. So just going through, I'm not going to reread the whole stimulus, but just kind of breaking it down into its component parts. We start off hearing that most songwriters get most of their money from radio airplay. Furthermore, hit songs are ones that get played thousands of times on the radio. We also hear that most songwriters don't actually write hits, and those that do rarely get more than one hit. Hits are sort of few and far between. Many songwriters who do actually manage to make a hit, a lot of these folks get asked to write songs for movie soundtracks. But we further hear that they declined such offers because, and it's written a little awkwardly, but when they say because, although blah blah blah, blah on the stimulus, the word because should still be important to you because it's signifying causal relationships. We know that that's a very important thing when we see it in a stimulus. We know that they decline offers sometimes because these movie songs they write often become hits, and these movie song deals pay once upfront instead of continuously, like radio airplay would for a hit. So my prephrase is going to consist of this. The clear implication is that the movie one-time payment regime, which I'll just abbreviate to MO from henceforth, is inferior to the radio airplay continuous payment model, which I will shorten to RC. There is a slim chance that perhaps MO is not actually inferior to RC, but that the songwriters who decline MO because of RC are either mistaken or have some other reason to prefer RC over MO. Whatever the underlying reality may be of what actually MO performs versus what RC performs, we at least know that one, there is an actual difference between MO and RC, at least in payment style, if not payment performance. So there is an actual difference. And two, hit songwriters often decline MOs because RC is a thing. RC is cited as the reason why MO gets declined by these people. So at the very least, it seems safe to say that hit songwriters who get MO offers prefer RC over MO, regardless of whether or not they're right to do so. Which, if you look at it, it's kind of wishy-washy and very non-committal, but it sounds a lot like prephrases that kind of work for a lot of questions that are easier on this exam. In particular, my experience of doing this question, I'm particularly pleased with myself that I even recognized that the stimulus didn't explicitly tell us whether or not MO is actually inferior to RC, whether these people were right in other words, to decline the offer. And that makes me even more satisfied with the non-committalness of my prephrase. So taking this prephrase from the previous slide into the answer choices, I am going to now begin to just assess them. So starting with A, this one's a fairly easy elimination. The stimulus tells us that the RC method pays out per play before the idea of hits are even brought up. So as far as we can tell, the RC paying out per play, this happens for every songwriter who gets something on the radio, even if that song isn't a hit. B is also elimination, but it wasn't quite as simple as A for me. At first glance, the stimulus does suggest that it's hit songwriters who are the ones who get approached for these MO deals. However, beyond that, there's nothing to support the idea that only hit songwriters ever get such offers. It doesn't eliminate the possibility that a studio, for some unknown reason, unspecified reason, might actually go for a non-hit writer. It's important to note that the get MO offer but declined because like RC better, that behavior in the stimulus is attributed to hit songwriters who get offered MO deals. But again, there's still no exclusivity like B is suggesting. We still don't know that it's basically impossible for a studio to give an MO offer to somebody who's not a hit songwriter. See, this one's a maybe. At the beginning, I was unfavorable toward it because at first glance, it's not consistent with my prephrase like A and B were. And C, the thing that kind of flagged C as a possibility for me is that it was way narrower in scope than my prephrase without being outright wrong. Another way of reading C is to say that at least some songs written for MO deals turn out to be hits, and we know that hits do well in the RC regime. So again, I didn't really predict this with my prephrase, but now that I look at it, I do feel unsafe ignoring it because it seems superficially possible that a song being a hit is required for the sort of mental calculus that goes into rejecting MO because RC is a thing. I'm not going to unpack it further right now. I'm just going to move on. And again, I just want to note that um, the only reason why C isn't an elimination is that, yes, it's not consistent with my prephrase, but with A and B, I could see a very clear logical reason why A and B were stretching much farther than what our stimulus supported. C is narrow, and it didn't seem to violate anything as clearly as A and B did. So that's why C survives. D is a maybe. And it's only a maybe instead of select at this point for me because I got hit by answer choice C. If C didn't exist, I'd be all over D because it sounds a lot like my prephrase. Pushing on to D, or excuse me, E. While E is certainly possible, it's it's like it's like A and B. Stimulus doesn't suggest that RC is ever the sole source of anyone's income. All we know is that most songwriters get most of their money this way, but there's nothing beyond that. We don't know that it's a thing where you can't really make money any other way. So yeah, E is very much like A and B. It requires a stretch of the stimulus on its face that we know is very dangerous to do for inference questions. So now that we're down to two answer choices, let's start with C and see which choice we get to make. So C, to remind you, says that some movie songs get thousands of plays on the radio, like hits do. Looking at it now, I feel like C is an unavoidable, if admittedly unstated, component of my prephrase. If we stick to the information the stimulus provides, the only explicit difference we know of between RC and MO is how they make their songwriters money. If an MO song that's a hit doesn't get hit like play in an RC deal and thereby wouldn't perform like a hit in RC, we suddenly really have no written basis for why a songwriter wouldn't take an MO deal. Of course, we could think of other things. The exposure is the first thing I can think of, and various other things. Maybe it's a rights issue. Who knows, right? There could be a whole host of other things that would make MO not seem like such a great deal. But that would be stuff I have to invent. But on its face, we know that RC performs well monetarily for hits, and if we know that if we take that away from a movie song, what makes RC a better inherently better deal than MO? Nothing that as written, right? So that's where I'm at with this one. So we're told that although MO pays up front, Some decline such offers because RC is a thing. So again, like I was saying, if the song wouldn't get hit like performance in RC, why not take the MO deal that, at least on paper, could possibly outperform an RC deal? And that's what brings me to the mental gymnastics point here. To eliminate C, I must come up with a bunch of other reasons hit songwriters prefer RC over MO, because if C is true, it explains very cleanly why RC is better than MO, right? And if I want to get rid of that, I have to invent stuff. And as much as I'd like to invent stuff, because that's kind of where my prephrase had me going, I have to check myself here. Stimulus really doesn't give me any of these other things. I would be inventing them out of whole cloth. The right stuff, the exposures, whatever else it might be, I am the one coming up with it. And that is a warning sign of unacceptable mental gymnastics. So I note here that it's a warning sign. I don't know that I actually want to not eliminate it yet based on that, but I do feel the danger of mental gymnastics hiding just behind the horizon here. So I do want to push into D as well. Most songwriters prefer RC over MO, again, which is very similar to our prephrase, which was that, hit songwriters who get MO offers prefer RC over MO. But looking at it now, D feels like a dangerous exploitation of that prephrase. Again, if we stick to the information the stimulus provides, the only kind of songwriter we actually know of that prefers RC over MO is a hit songwriter who's been asked to write a movie soundtrack song. They got an MO offer. Most songwriters, as D states, it's a much broader group, and it's one that includes songwriters who fail to get hits, possibly, and then thereby also fail to tap deeply into that sweet, sweet RC money. Why wouldn't some of these less fortunate folks, if offered a decent MO, take the MO? So to select D, I have to invent and accept the concepts that one, most songwriters as a group in general do have this preference for RC over MO, and two, this same preference that of course I don't even know if it's true or not, that this preference is replicated at least once in the very specific subset of songwriters who A wrote a hit and B got offered an MO deal. Much more so than C, the mental gymnastics that I have to do to accept D seems much more openly unacceptable. So, based on that, my final decision is to select C. So, C on its face says that some, which means at least one, MO songs get thousands of plays on the radio. This seems in line with the reasoning as written and even in line with my prephrase. It gives us a good reason, consistent with what little we know about RC versus MO. Why hit songwriters would sometimes decline an MO deal because of RC. It gives us a reason to believe that they would expect to perform fairly well under RC. And that would be reason enough to get rid of MO. Again, there could be other reasons, but as written, we at least have some basis for, okay, this could help explain why RC is preferred over MO. Eliminating C requires coming up with other reasons for the rejection of MO, which smacks of dangerous mental gymnastics. Again, if we wanted to get rid of C, we would have to say that, well, um, so what if it's true that an MO song gets, hit like playing on the radio? We would have to know explicitly that either um, the MO deal still underperforms financially the RC deal, which we don't know either way, which way it performs, or we would have to know that there's something, even if um, MO does outperform RC. Um, we would further have to know that there's some other reason why the artist would prefer an RC deal over an MO deal. And again, we don't know any of that. It's not that it's not plausible. It's just that as written, we have to recognize that we are the ones inventing these reasons to prefer a lower paying RC deal. Um, that again, licensing rights, exposure, whatever you want to put in there. We just don't know. We just don't know, and we'd have to invent that. And it's important to recognize where we are doing gymnastics that may be dangerous. In contrast, D, which says most songwriters prefer RC over MO, that actually is very in line with our prephrase, which I still stand by. It specifically ignored the actual performance of a song in RC versus MO. Note that I still don't actually know the performance of RC versus MO financially in answer choice C, and instead just focused on the ultimate preference for RC over MO. The real problem is selecting C on closer inspection requires Several other reasons for the rejection of MO, which smacks of dangerous mental gymnastics. Again, to refresh your memory from the previous slide, to pick D, we would have to assume that most songwriters do, in fact, have the preference stated in D. And not only that, beyond that, that this general preference amongst most songwriters is also represented slash replicated in the subset of people who get MO deals. And we don't really know how that would translate. So even if D were on its face correct, it wouldn't really explain what's going on with rejecting MO deals. We don't know for sure that the smaller subset of people, the people who write hits and get, furthermore, get MO offers, why those people are declining RC specifically. We couldn't infer from the basis of D that that's actually going on in that subset of people, the hit writers who get MO deals. So really, it's less about what is consistent on its face with the stimulus, because stimulus, I think, leaves us enough room to start thinking of other things, to start guessing. But when it comes down to elimination versus selection, eliminating C requires me to tap into some of that forbidden knowledge that I don't think we're supposed to. And in reverse, selecting D requires me to tap into that same forbidden knowledge pool. And so because of that, I feel it's unsafe to eliminate C, and it's unsafe to pick D, so I would pick C even though it wasn't my first choice, and still I don't think it's a particularly attractive answer. So now for the takeaways. Remember that everything that I demonstrate on this channel, including this video, comes out of my head, or in limited circumstances, it's what I've heard some other student do that I feel is fairly typical of the LR experience. Remember that that could very well not reflect your own reactions to the stimulus or the answer choices. So it's really no substitute for getting one-on-one help from somebody else or me, or at the very least, emailing me directly if your own journey through this question was significantly different than what I saw, or than what I put up here, excuse me. Um, but moving on, and to recap the actual content of today's video, I could have made both answers C and D consistent with the stimulus, but eliminating the correct one, C, required invention in gymnastics, and selecting the incorrect one, D, required invention in gymnastics. In such a scenario, I always prefer the path that requires no gymnastics, and what that led me to is that I couldn't eliminate C and I couldn't select D, so that leads me to um, selecting C. Arguably, I think some of you out there could have avoided all this extra analysis if you just properly read the because although language in the stimulus and really, really went all in on the causal relationship established between the mere existence of RC, which led to the rejection of MO. I think that is a feasible path for a lot of you readers out there. Nonetheless, I thought this question was a decent example of learning to recognize a narrower scope answer your inference prephrase may have missed, and avoiding mental gymnastics once you've recognized that narrower scope answer. And I think a lot of you guys who are struggling in the mid 160s, you guys are actually doing this first bullet point already. You're recognizing narrower scope answers because you've seen that you've missed questions in this category before based on that, where you picked an answer that sounded like a prephrase, and you noticed that there was a narrow scope answer that didn't seem explicitly wrong on its face, but you didn't really know how to analyze it, and the strength of the one that sounded like your prephrase was just too tempting to not pick, right? So really, I think the second point here, avoiding mental gymnastics, is the real key today of what I'm trying to go over. And that brings us to the end. Thanks for being here. If you are here, leave a comment for engagement and whatnot. And that's also I don't really respond to every single one, but I do get to read most of them. And if you have any further questions, feel free to email me at this email address. But otherwise, I will see you guys in the next one.